This week, in our first segment, we welcome Wade Woolwine. He's the principal threat intelligence researcher at Rapid7 to talk about a threat intel program and potential strategies. I also like the moniker Security Program Intel, I believe is what my notes say, which is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. In the second segment, Magno Gomes, the director of sales engineering at Core Security, a help systems company, is coming on to discuss penetration testing to validate vulnerability scanners. In the security news, how to teach your iPhone how to recognize you while you're wearing a mask and why that's a really horrible idea. Hackers targeting critical healthcare facilities with ransomware during the coronavirus pandemic, also a really bad idea. VMware plugs a critical flaw in vCenter server, Russian state hackers behind the San Francisco airport hack, and Macs are more secure, and other jokes you can tell yourself as we go back in time to 2006, even though the article was posted a couple days ago. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Qualys is introducing a new prescription for security, and it's free. Global IT asset discovery and inventory. Activate it today at securityweekly.com/Qualys so you can achieve 100% near real-time visibility across your hybrid environments. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
And welcome to the show. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the man all alone in the studio creating his own smoke cloud, Mr. Paul Asadoria.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode 646, being recorded on April 16th, 2020. And like Jeff said, I'm here in G-Unit Studios. Everyone else is coming on remotely, including Mr. Lee Neely. Welcome, Lee.
Excellent to be here. Enjoying a wonderful day out here in the southwest Idaho, and I'm looking forward to a great show tonight.
Fellow Idahoan, was that how you would say that? Mr. Tyler Robinson is here. Idahoan Tyler Robinson. Welcome, Tyler.
Who are you calling an Idahoan?
Right?
Now listen here.
Mr. Jeff Mann, of course, is here with us as well. Welcome, Jeff.
Yep. All alone in my own place.
Yes. A couple of quick announcements. We've officially migrated our mailing list back to our original platform. We are working with technology that will allow you, the listener, to tell us what you're interested in terms of computer security related topics, 55 of them, in fact, and then we will customize your communication preferences for registering for things like webcasts and such. You can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe, click the button to join the list, and once you've joined, we will update your interests, and that project will be continuing throughout the year to provide a richer experience for our audience, so you get the things that you're most interested in. Wade Woolwine is here with us. His research focuses on threat intelligence and security program maturity and effectiveness, and he's on here tonight to discuss security program intel. Did I get that right? I made that note right. How's it going, Wade?
Hey, Paul. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. You can visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 for more information about Rapid7's products. I know you heard the Qualys ad. They are both sponsors on the show. Which is indicative of how well both of their products, I believe, are doing. Of course, with Wade on it being sponsored by Rapid7, you should go to securityweekly.com/Rapid7 and find out what Rapid7's been up to today. So much more than just vulnerability scanning, as Wade will allude to in his research at Rapid7. into security program maturity and intelligence. So Wade, why don't you kick it off by, I guess, giving us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I've been doing various aspects of security, incident detection and response primarily, but some pauses in application security and things like that. But ultimately, most of my career has been spent chasing the bad guys. And so naturally, that has kind of led me into the threat intel space. But more specifically curious about how threat intel can better influence security programs as a whole. We know how it works for detection and response, but how can we take some of that information, bubble it up a couple levels, and maybe provide executives and managers some better insight into what's going on?
I think it's a very important aspect of managing your security program, and it's often, as Jeff is usually quick to point out, confused between the terms. People get the terms, vulnerabilities, threats, exposures, risk, kind of all mangled in together and interchange them when you really shouldn't, right? But threat is a very important part of your program to understand that at a certain capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all know that security programs only function when all of the parts are functioning properly, right? You can't have a rock star DNR team, detection and response team, and be lax on the prevention side of things or on the hardening or anything that reduces the attack surface. Everything needs to work together. And when we focus on metrics and findings and kind of things that are specific to the silo from which they're coming, we miss the bigger picture, right? We miss the fact that our patch cycle lasting 30 days actually was the cause for the attacker getting in and stealing all of our customer data. So trying to look at things more holistically and seeing what the connections are, seeing what feeds what impacts what, and how we can leverage those metrics to ultimately tie up to those top level metrics of risk, impact, efficiency, and effectiveness.
Yeah, you were referencing, I believe, Rebecca Brown's work, where she categorized the 4 types of threat intel. Could you kind of summarize that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And it mirrors what you're going to see in traditional military intel, right? So there's the tactical intelligence, the stuff that's going to matter to the front line. In cybersecurity, for us, that's indicators of compromise, IP addresses, and other various rules that we're looking for. So that's the stuff that's ephemeral, that changes, about every 24 hours or so, but it's still an important component. And that's where every threat intel person starts. Moving up the chain, you want to start focusing on some of the campaigns that are going on. So you want a higher level picture of what attackers are targeting, specifically what industries, what customers, what are driving those attacks, what are the motivation. You're trying to understand why an attacker would target you in the first place. So that's a little less technical in nature, but much more akin to what you would consider traditional military threat intel research to be. Then you move up yet another level, and you're really looking at the overall shifts in the threat landscape. The popularity of ransomware being one of those major shifts, right? So you're looking for shifts that are, of a period of 6 or 12 months or something like that, something that is going to help you shape the future of your security program from a strategy perspective. And then the last bit, which she started touching on, and which is where most of my focus has been on the organizational intel piece, right? So it's great to know everything that you know about the attack surface, but if you don't know yourself, if you don't know how your systems and how your programs are performing, then you only have half the equation. You know what the bad guys are doing, but you don't know what they can do to you.
Mm. No, it's very good to have that spelled out, because again, I think it's something that people lose sight of, and I think ultimately, these factors play into how do I prioritize what I'm doing as a security team, what I'm doing as an organization to protect and prevent or detect bad things happening, right? And there's so many factors that go into it. What do you recommend people start if you want to come into work, get a fresh start, and go, all right, we need to prioritize our security program? What's your advice, Wade?
That's a bit of a loaded question, because it's going to largely depend on where you are from a maturity perspective. But I look at a few different categories, what I call areas of investment, right? The things that executives should be talking about investing in. The first one being preparation, right? Like, if you come in one day and you want to change the world, write a plan first, because inevitably, if you don't have a plan, you'll probably screw it up, because we're not all that talented. So you got to have everything down on paper. You got to have buy-in. You got to make sure that the road is paved for your success, because it's going to be a painful journey. And if you don't take the time to prepare up front to get people's buy-in, it's just going to be impossible. So from there, you move into prevention. And prevention is all about starting with technology to prevent threats from materializing, and maturing your prevention by adding people and process to better care for that technology. The next phase is detection, right? So you know that your prevention layer is not going to stop everything. You're going to need some people, process, and some technology in order to really drive good detection. And there again, you're rolling out technology, you're putting people in place, and the process is the thing that matures. The detection, you get better at detection, you get more efficient at detection. You add technologies and things like that, but it's mostly the process that's going to mature you. From there, it's about response and recovery. How do you do with people, process, and technology from throughout the entire organization? Because incident response, as much as I'd love it to just be about chasing the bad guys on a computer, it's really more about how the business responds to the threat and the bad publicity that comes along with it. So how do you do in response? And then lastly, how do you mature this stuff? How do you give back to your organization? How do you provide security as a service? Because once your security program matures to the point where you're really helping advance the business goals, then the business wants more out of you. They want you as part of M&A. They want you as part of other business processes. So how do you offer security consulting to your own organization?
Jeff?
So many questions. Where do I start? You slipped in a statement somewhere in the middle of your description there that I wanted to just touch on real quick. You said you got to have everything on paper. Can you expound on that a little bit? I assume you mean you have to have like written procedures, written policies that you're acting upon, things like that. So part A to my question is that what you're talking about? Part B, I guess, is where do you see that happening in terms of the maturing of an organization?
So for part A, I think it really depends on your use case. At Rapid7, I've been fortunate to work with 10-person companies and very, very many more person companies than that. So it really depends on what you're after. For the 10-person company, a plan on a bunch of napkins by some nerds who know what they're doing, like that could be somewhat acceptable, maybe in some circles. But realistically, I'm talking about more of a project plan. How are you going to phase it out? How are you going to approach it? What methodology are you chasing down? Are you going to be a niche shop where you're probably going to retire before you implement it? Or are you going to go lightweight but entirely too broad, like a CIS top 20? So it really depends on your use case. And I think that's what I am approaching this SPI thing with, and the way that I'm creating it, because I'm kind of taking the attack kind of sticks 2.0 approach, where there's some structure, but you can add stuff as you see fit. So as this idea materializes, it's really important for me for it to be flexible.
So
and part B.
In terms of the maturity of a security organization, or the maturity of the organization that has security part of operations, you seem to be implying, and I would tend to agree, that what mature looks like varies depending on the size of the organization, depending on, you mentioned people, process, and technology. I like to overlay that discussion when I'm talking to people about those items with, and you're sort of touching on it, purpose. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the goal, overall goal? Whether you're mapping it to a framework or a standard or a compliance standard or whatever. Would you say that maturity, given that it's going to look differently depending on the size of the organization, are there some essential elements that have to be there in order to claim maturity, regardless of how formally they're presented or they're preserved?
I think the term maturity gets tossed around an awful lot, and we don't really have a good definition for it. You can talk about your ability to be resilient against different types of threats as a bar for maturity, but I don't know that necessarily plays in. And so the maturity piece I'm still trying to figure out. Now, what I have kind of surmised in my own head, I've talked about the areas of investment that I just listed. Within those areas of investment, there are going to be, core focus capabilities like endpoint detection and response is a core focus. And then under that core focus, you're going to have capabilities like I need to detect threats in memory. I need to detect threats here, there, and the other thing. And I think that the maturity is largely going to be dependent on the capabilities that you need to accomplish your business objectives, right? So as an example, you're not going to stand up your detection and response program by hiring a principal malware analyst. Wouldn't work, right? There's no point. So there is, I think, an order in that things should go in, but I haven't really established a measurement of maturity and how that maps into capabilities.
Well, one last question, and I'll stop bogarting the mic. You described 4 types of threat intelligence: tactical campaigns, the shift in the landscape, and sort of the organizational self-study, or how I didn't catch an actual title for that 4th element. Do all 4 of those things need to be present to consider the organization to be mature, or is there a minimum of these things that happen that sort of gets you down the road towards maturity?
Okay, yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from. So if you think about the standard maturing of a security program, organizations are typically going to start by rolling out software, right? That's going to be the first thing that they're going to do. First thing is going to be technology, and that's where the tactical threat intelligence comes into play. So I think everyone starts at the lowest maturity at tactical, and then they move up from there, but it's not because they don't need it. It's because they can't use it, right? The program itself has not matured to the point where shifts in the threat landscape make any difference to you because you're too busy putting out the fires that are hitting you every single day.
Wade, I think that the beginning for a lot of organizations, and when I would classify an organization as not being very high on the maturity model, is they haven't had the discussions with senior management or the business owners about risk and about what's important to the business. I mean, we say understanding the business, but what does that really mean? Understanding the business goals and objectives, understanding what's most important to the business and your customers, right? And then having that discussion about risk and risk tolerance, right? Is that the start of even knowing where you are on the maturity scale?
I mean, I think that's the start of any security program, right? I mean, we live to serve businesses in security teams. They pay us to do the work. So if we aren't informed as to what the business is expecting of us, it's going to be really difficult to meet those expectations and keep them happy and continuing to run budgets. So for me, the very first question that I ask organizations, especially if they're being stubborn about giving me their objectives, is like, what do you have that's valuable? Tell me what I can steal that's going to really ruin your day. And that's where we start from, because that gets them immediately engaged. They stop thinking about cybersecurity as cybersecurity, and they actually start thinking about it as crime, as impact. Now, as far as measurements of risk and impact and things like that, there are probably a million different ways of doing it out there. I don't think that there's a business executive that will tell us that they have a good handle on risk and impact. And I think part of that is just because of the way that we look at security metrics in general. We look at attack surface metrics, we look at DNR metrics, but we don't often look at them together because we don't necessarily understand the connection between the two. And that's where the objectives of the business come into play, right? So if my business owner tells me, this is always what they tell us, I want to minimize the chance of me being breached. Okay, well, that tells me that there's an attack surface management component of that, right? So we want to reduce the attack surface, but we need to be prepared for it to go through. So at that point, now I have a way to join those two things together. And I haven't gone this far in my research, but my goal is to figure out how the metrics that drive each of those disciplines can bubble up to something that looks like risk and impact. And it may not be like a CVSS style score. It may just be directionally. Do we care directionally about where risk and impact is going?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind within this discussion is the culture as a variable in these equations. And the reason I think about that is when I think many of us security professionals, right, have gone in and said, well, we need to apply security, right? And then we have these measurements like, well, are you in finance? Are you in healthcare? And that speaks to the culture. But, coming from having worked at a university, I wish I had really spent the time to understand culture as a separate kind of data point, right? Because there are cultural things that you're probably not going to be able to change that you have to then implement a security program around, right? And does that factor into the framework that you're building?
That has to. That has to, because I always, this story always sticks with me. A friend of mine had taken a new gig as a CISO or something like that in some firm that did a lot of accounting stuff. And when he walked in there, the security program was atrocious. And his big thing was, I'm going to wait for the auditor to get here and run the audit, and we're going to fail the audit, and that's going to be my ticket to driving the security program. Well, the auditor came in, didn't fail, because all of the controls were in place in the accounting department. They weren't technology controls, they were process controls, and they were acceptable. So we need to recognize, and I, more than anybody else, need to recognize that the technical solution isn't always the best one, right? The best solution is the one that fits the business. And we need to be able to account for that as part of what we do, because we're not just dealing with metrics out of technology to tell us how we're doing. We have to look at the process. We have to be able to measure the process to understand how people are factoring it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm also going back to my interviews and research into the FAIR risk model, and how I think it's so important to take in, and it's difficult to measure still, the impact and probability when you're assessing threats out there, right? And threats to your business. Let's say you've got the culture down, right? You understand the business. To me, like, the next step in the program is coming up with a process to say, okay, when something comes across our desk, or we're concerned about anything as having a potential impact to the business, how do we measure the impact and the probability? I mean, it's also similar to threat modeling, right?
It's 100% threat modeling, and the ultimately the better structure that you have around your data, and by data I don't just mean like data that's coming out of technology, but content and what layers you have in place, and just a good representation of your security program, you can better understand the potential impact, right? Because if let's just take a vulnerability, for example, VMware vulnerability, perfect. But you don't run VMware. Right. Do you need to be concerned about that? Right? No, you don't. So it's really important to take those things it's important to take your own posture into consideration when evaluating the threat landscape.
How do we, go ahead, Lee.
So as you're working on maturity, and you're coming in there as a third party, how do you empower the business to continue to grow their posture, maturity, so that when you walk away as a consultant, it's not back to the same old, recidivism kind of thing? Or is that?
Yeah, you could see that internally too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really difficult one. In my several years as a consultant, I had repeat customers, obviously, and it was tiring to go back in and really see the same old problems. And so that's why I started managed service and ran a managed service for a little while. So having more control over the people and delivering the capability, but even that's not enough. And so the reason why I'm starting on what I'm doing now is to try to empower people to better do it for themselves. While I'm starting with organizing data, the value adds that we can have in structured both data from a metrics perspective, but also content, as in educational security content, classified and delivered just in the right amount of time, has applications that I can't even imagine. So for me, it's just about creating this framework and then letting people that are way smarter than I do awesome stuff with it.
Yeah, it seems to me that the problem we're trying to solve with this framework that we're speaking of is how to consume information about vulnerabilities, threats to the business, and evaluate those, and then prioritize your actions, right? I mean, that's really the kind of the gist of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actions across a lot of different disciplines, right? So in your VM program, you have actions, you got to go patch, right? But what should be the priority of that patching?
Mm-hmm.
Are we susceptible to a particular attack that's going to leverage that vulnerability, or are we just following random CVSS scores that don't take into account our own posture? So there's a lot of security programs or systems, right? And there are a lot of different components that come in and play together. When one of those components isn't working correctly or isn't doing its thing, all the other components suffer. So what I'm trying to do is understand the various components, the interconnection between the two, how to measure their performance so that we can more quickly maybe identify where there are weaknesses.
Wade, I know you did pen testing and consulting. Tyler, I know you do that today. The organizations that are the most difficult to breach, are they the ones that are able to evaluate the threats and prioritize effectively? Is that a common characteristic against for companies that are able to really do a good job defending against advanced threats?
I think that organizations that do the best at, first of all, not getting caught by the pen testers, but then also responding appropriately when the pen testers do come in, have that appreciation for the totality of the components that comprise the threat intel program or the security program. They're not overinvested in detection or response or vulnerability management. They're pretty well balanced. Now, I'll say that I have breached Fortune 10 companies. It just, even those with the most money and the biggest programs still fall prey.
Well, they have the largest attack surface as well. I think that's the most difficult job.
I'll add to that. I'll add to that and say it's not necessarily like if they get breached, it comes back to the thing that we talk about, the importance of that defense in depth. And they are typically the ones that are getting the fundamentals right. As they're doing and becoming more mature, they realize that there's always something to do. They're doing the things they can do really well. And then they are taking those particular things, building a backup plan, a defense in-depth plan, and they're adding on to it. So it's not necessarily whether I get in, I always get in. It is how long they have from time to detection to time to remediation. How deep can I get in their network? How fast can I laterally move? How many things can I gain access to? Do they have least privilege set up? It is, there are companies out there that spend, X amount of time and dollars to write that 0-day exploit to make an entry point. But if that gets you that entry point and they have a good time to detection and time to remediation and they boot you out right after that, then you just blew that 0-day. So really the ones that are doing this well are the ones that have the understanding of that defense in depth, have the backup plans, getting the fundamentals right, and making sure that all those pieces, having that big picture view while getting the details right.
What I'm hearing is very interesting, and there's a theme from what Wade and Tyler just said, is that the best security teams are very well-rounded. I think defense in depth is a kind of an overused term, right? It sounds to me like the best security teams are not siloed and focused on any one or two particular areas, right? They're looking at the entire picture going, yeah, let's do a great job in this one particular area, but then it reaches a point where no matter how deep we go here, something's going to happen. Let's back up and let's make sure we cover all of our bases and not put all our eggs in one basket.
And that's where I think that maturity is really driven by capabilities at that point.
Do you see a difference, Wade, between in terms of sort of defining this thing that we call maturity, based on the framework that you're trying to put together? Is there a difference? Can or should there be a difference between, and I'm thinking in particular of these 10-person companies that there's no way they're going to build any type of this infrastructure that we've just been talking about into their security program. But is there a difference between getting to the point where you're protecting against being attacked, being breached, you're locked down, quote unquote, secure, so secure as a state? Is there a difference between that and getting to the point where you're, you know your environment, you know what your weaknesses are, you know where the holes are, and you've got the things in place for detection, and you're hopefully detecting things that happen early and minimizing the damage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we build security programs, if we're building security programs right, we're starting with the crown jewels and we're moving out from there. We don't start with the perimeter firewalls and the perimeter fences and move in. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. You want to focus most of your resources around what matters most, because the further the attacker gets into those layers, the more you're really going to have to keep an eye on it. So when I work with customers on trying to build out their security programs, it's really where we start, because the 10-person company can come up with a really good way of protecting their crown jewels without dropping a single new piece of technology. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to get wiped out by ransomware, but hey, all they need to do is walk down to Best Buy and buy 10 computers and they're back in business.
Yeah, and
Right.
I'll actually add to that. Some of the best security that I've come against, and it was a very large organization, very large financial organization, was ran by a 3-person security team. This is a worldwide global financial firm. They should probably have more people there doing that, but they did all the fundamentals very, very well with what they had. They were able to, because they had buy-in from the executive levels down, because they'd proven their value over and over again, they were utilizing all the tools that they had at their disposal, many of them free, many of them Microsoft products, many of them, combinations of several products, because they had to figure it out. But they were just doing the most with whatever they had, and they were doing it very, very well. And so size of the security organization, or the security within inside of an organization, doesn't always matter. It really is kind of how well you do and utilize the people and technologies you have. A lot of places spend a lot of money, and that return on investment for those technology bits, it doesn't always pay off. Honestly, the guy had it figured out. He said, I have a lot of technology at my disposal. At this point, I would not want any more technology. I'd want more people. People actually tend to make a bigger difference, and I can do a lot more with people because they can control multiple technologies.
Out of curiosity, Tyler, in the company that you were describing that had a 3-person security team, how much of the preventive stuff that Wade alluded to earlier in our conversation, in terms of, secure configurations, patch management, keeping up to date on vulnerability detection and things like that, how much of that sort of other stuff were they responsible for versus it was happening in the organization? Within other parts of the organization.
So that was one of the big kind of differentiations. They were building a lot of the stuff from the ground up, like being driven by security. So security was not the ones handling that. There were secure deployments that were being pushed out by the desktop teams and server teams, but the security team worked very closely with them, and they bought into the whole vision. And so as part of the process, yes, there were, many other people building and doing other things, but security as a whole was from the directive of the security team. And so I think that team collaboration, that trust, and that interoperability and kind of collaboration was one of the things that made them actually work and work well.
Yeah, and I think Wade, this kind of ties into your research as well. How do you, as a security person, understand what you have and what your strengths are? And not just inside the security team. What I hear, Tyler and Wade describing is, it's not just about like the ninjas on the security team, what their expertise is. Sure, that's a component. But when you go to your various teams that have different technologies that may or may not be security related, how do you conduct the study to figure out like what we have and what we do well?
Oh, that is the reason for several hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees that I've been able to get over the years. It's tough.
Enter PCI, Paul.
Compliance could be a component of it, sure.
Well, yeah, compliance can be a component of it, but people are failing at basic asset inventory and software inventory. So let alone like application inventory and stuff like that. Like organizations, most businesses are trying to move as fast as possible, and a lot of IT organizations just give carte blanche to the various business units to go use whatever the hell SaaS technology you want to without going through the security review and stuff like that. And unfortunately, a lot of that comes with a lot of that capability with being able to track an inventory and catalog and assess. All of that comes with higher maturity teams that are mature enough that they have developed processes to free up some additional strategic time to work on that stuff. I worked for AOL for a number of years, and we had an incredible application security program, but that was AOL. Like, they had filthy amounts of money, and not many organizations can.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to identifying the various teams and their skills that could be individual people, but also identifying the teams and the leaders on those teams and who's doing those effective jobs. And if you can tie those things together, I think you can then start to build a cross-disciplinary team, right, and get them all on board with security. You got a developer that is a total ninja in this technology. How do you use that to your advantage as a security team, right? Tyler, it sounds like that's what that financial organization was doing, right? Identifying those teams, those leaders, and those skill sets and technologies, and using them to security's advantage.
100%. And one of the things to add to that is that kind of that cross-discipline, cross-training component. Really, anybody can be a champion of a product or a solution, and it may not even be within inside of your discipline. You really have to, as a leader and as a manager within inside of these companies, look for those people that have those kind of key passions. And if it's outside of their job function, then find a way to facilitate interoperability and cross knowledge transfer, and really feed into those different passions, because those are the people that are going to care and do it outside of work and expand upon it very, very quickly. And B, you're also getting that level of excitement into those other teams that, this may be their job function, but they may not be excited about it. But now someone is excited, and we have someone to kind of train and mentor, and it really builds a much better camaraderie ship, and it builds a much better security program from multiple areas of the business components. Because if you don't have buy-in from all the business components, it makes it very difficult to affect change very quickly and do big things.
And if you don't have buy-in from the user base, like, you can't do any of that, right? If the user base revolts against you, then leadership will eventually do it as well. And that brings into importance, like, the mission of security. I know it sounds cliche as hell, but like, getting people to believe in protecting data is super important. If you look at the data disclosures that we've seen, just taking the last month and the last 2 months, a lot of them have been, oh, derp, sorry, I left that employee file on the open server to the internet, and it's not even a press went and picked it up. So we need to get more people to care about security, not by teaching them technology, but just by getting them to be careful.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's not about technology, right? And one of the things that's going through my head is the ways in which you leverage your social engineering skills to improve your security program, right? And the scenario that I'm thinking of listening to everyone is, you may have two teams, and one team is maybe the developers. They don't like security. They don't trust security, and that's going to be an uphill battle. But when development has problems, they go to this certain ops team, and there's a person or two in there that they trust. And guess what? That person in the ops team, they trust security, right? So you can start to build kind of these relationships through these different layers in different groups as a social engineering experiment, right? Going to your ops team, going, I know you buy into security. Hey, can you help me, maybe get them doing this one thing in development, and they're not going to trust me right away, but they already trust you. So let's leverage that, and then that starts bringing the entire company towards a more mature security program. I don't know how you put that in a framework, Wade, but that would be awesome to kind of build that in. That those interpersonal skills are super important in our jobs as security professionals.
For sure. And I mean, that's a cultural thing. That's a business cultural thing, right? I mean, if you think about last time you were employed by an organization, or the last few jobs that you had, like, there's a good chance that you behaved differently in the different organizations, because every organization has its own culture. And of course, we often want to survive in that culture. So we'll adapt in some way, shape, or form. I advocate with executives that they make security part of the culture, and getting super cliche, but I always say, look, start with the data. Like, start with the data. People will care about the data, because typically it's going to be some kind of identifiable information that they'd feel bad about losing. So start with that, and then grow security education and security involvement and team building and all of that from there.
Lee?
So I actually had two questions. One is, you were reminding me of a friend of mine moved from, used to work at the lab, moved up here, now working with an employer with a very different mission. And she looks at the security things that they allow, and it's a big culture shift for her as a security professional, figuring out what's important to, what's important to the business. And she's learning the hard way that what they value and what the lab values, because they have completely different, one's a public-facing retail business, and the other was obviously a government research institute. Different things are important, and I'm thinking, how prevalent is that the security team hasn't yet aligned with the mission of the business they're in, or is that rare?
It's sadly very prevalent, and it comes from a couple different reasons, right? Sometimes it's the security team that just doesn't have a talented enough leader to figure out how to align security to the business. But more often than not, I find that and again, this is not a slight against executives, but it's the executives that really kind of lack the core knowledge to help influence the security program in the right way. So if the security program has a weak leader and weak knowledge in the business leadership, then you're doomed, right? Then nothing good is going to happen there. And the flip side is also true. So unfortunately, I see a lot of it. But oftentimes those are really easy conversations for folks like, how many of us are on this call? 6, 5? It's easy conversations for folks like us to have because we understand the technical piece and how to combat the threats. But we've been doing this for long enough that we also have a business piece. So we can speak both sides, but there aren't very many of us out there. And that's ultimately the problem that I'm trying to solve for. So
that brings me to my second question, sort of, is we were talking about security measures in place, and it's like, well, how is this done? And the answer is, it's done by GPO. And the question is, well, do you make sure that the OU that device is in actually inherits that GPO or not? And as I was remembering that, I was thinking, is there a balance between how many of our controls should be tested by an internal team, short of going up to a full-on pen test, very comprehensive? Particularly as an organization is maturing, do you have any advice on that space, on just how many rugs they should pick up and make sure everything's copacetic?
I mean, I'd say as many as possible, but the reality is that they barely have time to do their day jobs. So for me, it's really about prioritizing how much that matters to you in your current evolution of your security program. Because you, the security person, or you, the business owner, might tell me, look, I'm just 100% focused on trying to build this wall to be the bare minimum height. And okay, well, then that's what you need to focus on, because that's all the bandwidth that you have. However, when it comes to being able to do rehearsals, being able to do practices like that, I often recommend that organizations start with tabletop, because those are pretty easy, low effort to get them stood up, and it gets the executives involved. It gets them oftentimes very interested in what's going on. From there, you do your own internal scanning, and the security team does the validation of the work that the IT team is supposed to be doing around attack surface management. From there, maybe you do some external scanning more frequently, because now you have some extra time, and then you evolve into kind of the full red team followed by purple team, and so on and so forth. I think that's the way the maturity goes. But again, it's going to be different, I think, for most organizations.
I think one of the struggles is making folks in your organization understand the impact, right? I think that's something that we all have struggled with and still struggle with today as security professionals, is making others in the organization understand that impact, short of having a breach, right? You want to make them understand it before you have a breach.
Yep. One of the other pieces to that too, though, that is often overlooked is the adversarial mindset. Many of these places and even security teams, to an extent, well, they do know a lot of TTPs, or they do know some of the threat landscape. They understand some of the vulnerabilities, how attackers often operate, and or how the risk to the business is affected via different mechanisms. From an attacker standpoint, is either overlooked or just unknown, because not everyone thinks like an attacker. That's why we're paid as consultants to bring kind of that pain, because that pain is ultimately doing some kind of adversarial emulation or simulation in order to show that risk, demonstrate what an attacker is doing, and not just look at a checklist bunch of vulnerabilities, or be able to patch and say you're fully secure. If that was the case, compliance would have been the 100% solution all along. So really having that kind of creative mind, having the business understanding, being able to correlate those, and then look at it from an adversarial mindset, and bring the evil bit to the conversation. That's where you almost always have to have some kind of an outside source, or some kind of an outside team help you.
Yeah, for sure. But we've seen, and sorry, that sounded argumentative. We've seen some really great stuff out of Attack and Sticks trying to start bridging that gap, right? So Sticks 2.0
Yes.
gives us much greater visibility into what attackers are doing. Now it's on us to start sharing that information. One of the things that I hope for SPI, if it works out the way I think it will, we'll have a method by which to share what is working with our security programs more broadly.
So is that from kind of the less around the TTPs and more around kind of the broad root problems, like don't fix this particular technique. Really, if you fixed authentication mechanisms or 2FA or some form of good secure hygiene, looking at it from a very top level and not a signature based / technique based, I think that's when it starts to make bigger impacts, right? Not looking so much at those individual attacker aspects and really bringing the conversation to the root problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the technical indicators are for the bottom level, but those technical indicators also feed into what technique and tactic they map to, and then also what other campaigns we've seen around it, and that's where stick stuff starts coming into play.
Now, do these particular things, are they easily mappable to like multiple different guidelines? I know you mentioned like NIST and Attack, and I see a lot of organizations that really have no great regulatory body over them, so they don't really have to follow any of them, so they end up following a bunch of them. Now, does that make it better or worse to kind of map those to the stuff you're doing? And can you map multiple guidances to different areas of what you're looking at?
Yeah, you definitely need to map, right? I mean, I don't think we'll ever get away from people wanting to drive against existing standards. I think the thing that I'm trying to propose here is a way of standardizing best practices, maybe. But yes, the idea is that you should be able to select a particular compliance regime that you're under, maybe a legal regime that you're under, or privacy regime that you're under, and then have the framework map into the areas of investment and functional areas and capabilities that you need in order to achieve that. That requires a lot of legwork from a human perspective, but we've had to go do that in our consulting practice anyways for program development stuff.
Yeah. Every other week when there's a new guideline coming out or some new attack framework.
Yep, for sure.
Wade, we just have 5 questions for you. I know you've been on the show before. Is that true?
It was a long time ago.
Okay. I don't know if you've answered Security Weekly's 5 questions, but in any case, you answer them again if you have before. So you're ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Let's do it.
Wade, 3 words to describe yourself.
Crazy, hermit, farmer.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Bat, Lucille specifically.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Too many hobbies.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Totally first.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Live, fictional, dead, or otherwise?
So this is not a political endorsement. Barack Obama as Pops.
You can choose whoever you want. We will not judge you on the air.
No judgment.
Martha Stewart as Mom.
Ooh,
That's an interesting combination.
Whoa. Mostly because I get Snoop Dogg for free.
Your Uncle Snoop Dogg.
Uncle Snoop. Wade, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thanks, guys. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with our next interview. Magno Gomes from Core Security, a help systems company. Stay tuned.